Okay, a quick little painting today of a coal tit. So I'm going to start in the beak. I've got a really light pencil sketch that I've just done in HB pencil. I'm on Archer's cold press paper. I'm going to take, I think I'm going to start with a little bit of yellow ochre. So I'm going to start with, or raw sienna, either or. Really milky wash of yellow ochre. And I'm going to start in the beak. Just going to pop that on the top half of the beak, wet down the whole thing. So I've gone onto dry paper and I'm just painting in the beak shape with the yellow ochre. And I'm going to come underneath and paint the bottom of the beak as well, but I'm not going to touch the top and the bottom together, hopefully. Then I'm going to take a slightly bigger brush. It's another just a synthetic that I've got here. I'm going to take some indigo. I think that's indigo. I've got some Daniel Smith indigo in my well. I'm going to take off the excess, so I'm just going to touch my brush to some tissue. So I don't want a lot of water in my brush. Then I'm going to drop that into that yellow ochre. Oh, I just touched. Didn't mean to do that. I just touched the top to the bottom. And drop a little bit in the top there. So I'm letting the indigo bleed through that yellow ochre. I'm going to wash my brush and just run my wet brush along that edge of indigo. So I'm just after a little bit of a soft bleed, blending of the indigo into the yellow ochre. I'll tidy up the tip of the beak later, but I'm too wet in there at the moment. I'll end up introducing a whole lot of water in there. So I'm just going to let that first wash dry and then I'll come back and add some more later. Okay, so I'm just dragging that indigo up through the beak. All right, now I'm going to start, I think on the darks of the head. Now I'm going to use, I think, some indigo and some Van Dyke brown to get my dark. So I've got some indigo in my well here. I'm going to squeeze out some more fresh because I've got a reasonably big area to cover. So get out some fresh indigo and some fresh Van Dyke brown, also from Daniel Smith. I'm going to take a medium-sized brush. This is a Neef 4750 LP. It's a squirrel Taklon mix. It's got a nice point. I wet my brush. I'm going to dip it into both of those, so into the brown and into the indigo. Then I'm going to come onto the head, and I think I might start on this side. I'm going to start in the middle of the shape and push out a bit because I don't want to get the head bigger than my pencil line. So I'm coming onto dry paper because I want the colour strong. I'm going to drag out a few flicks on the back of the head. Then come and bring that up to my pencil line, over the top of the head. Okay, coming down to the beak. Now, I don't want to touch this into that beak because I've still got a bit of water in the beak and it will run into there. So to help myself with that, I'm going to switch to a slightly smaller brush now so that I can get closer in without getting into trouble. So I'm going to come around the eye. I'm just leaving the shape of the eye at the moment. Now I'll come as close to the beak as I can. Okay, so I'm going to come right up to the edge of the beak without touching. So my page is quite, I do have a bit of water in there. It's not saturated, it's just damp. Okay. All right. I think that I'm going to just drag that down a little. I'm just looking at my shape. So he's got this sort of little tuft at the top, which I'll just pop in. Okay, then I'm going to continue with that dark now underneath. So again, going onto dry paper, I'm coming underneath. So I'm starting in the middle of the throat and pushing out again, so I don't end up going larger than I want to. Be a bit messy around the edge there. Coming up to the beak. Again, trying not to touch that beak. I'll bring it up. There's a little bit of a white gap in there. Now, I'm not going to come all the way down here. What I'm going to do, I want this pigment to bleed. So I'm going to take a clean brush. And I'm going to paint with water. I'm going to start in the page, in the dry page. Start on the dry paper and walk up. And just every now and then, I'm going to just touch to that edge. And that pigment's going to run down wherever I've dragged water. Now, I want more light on this side. So I'm going to take the excess off my brush and just paint all the way to that edge, because I want that pigment, I don't want that pigment to stop in a hard edge. I do want it to keep moving. So I'll come down, little flick for the leg, and I'll wet that whole area so that that pigment's got somewhere to run. I'll keep an eye on it. If it gets too strong, I'll touch my brush to it and wick it back a bit. And I probably want the dark to come all the way around, so I'm just going to touch a little bit. Now, I don't want to introduce a whole lot more water into the page there, or everything will shoot. I just want a little bit, just in the back here. And then I'm just going to check my shape in here. I probably need a little bit more pigment. So I might take a finer brush now, and I'm just going to put in a few little flicks to kind of suggest feathering around the face, but you don't want to get too patterned or too precise. Keep it fairly loose. And if you do get too patterned, I don't quite like that shape, so I'm going to take my brush, clean water, and I'm just going to put it into that edge just to mess up that edge a bit. I just don't want to be too laboured in there. So I'm just dropping in a little bit of water, and I'll let the pigment do whatever it wants. I might do the same. I might do a little bit of that up here too, just under the eye. So I'm just painting the dry paper and then touching it to that pigment. And because it's got the indigo in there, it will bleed for quite a while. But again, you need to be careful not to introduce a whole lot of water, because you can get bleeds everywhere that you might not necessarily want. I'm just gonna... Okay, so I've been playing in there for a bit, so I feel like I need to get out of there because I'm going to start to fuss. So leave that alone. And I'm going to come in and think about the wing before I think about any of the darks underneath there. So the wing has got, I guess, a little bit of purple in here, a few browns. So I might stick to, I'm going to use a little bit of indigo and queen violet, I think, in the wing. And then maybe some Van Dyke and burnt sienna in the bottom part of the wing here. And I'm just going to touch into that wet paper. So I'm retaining some light and bring that up to my pencil edge. Then I'm going to paint in some of those, some feathers here. Now, I normally I'd probably flip this the other way. I don't really like putting my brush in this direction, but I've drawn it this way, so I have to live with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my brush in some Van Dyke and in the burnt sienna. So I'm picking up a bit of both on my brush. I'm going to come in and just, now you're not going to be able to see it under my hand. So all I'm doing is using the brush to make a few strokes. So I'm thinking I've got a wing. And I'm coming up and I'm touching into that purple. I might put one more underneath there. And then I've got the rest of the tail in there that I'm going to try and probably go a bit darker. So now I'm going to pick up some more Van Dyke on my brush than burnt sienna. And I'm going to put my brush down and put in a tail. Might even put a stroke up there. Come out and let that dry. Now, under here I need to build up my darks. I've got dry paper now here. So I'm going to stay out of that wing. Actually, I just look at my reference. I might put one little row of dark on there. So I'm just going to grab some Van Dyke and I'm just going to put a row of feathers, sort of touching the join from the dry on that burnt sienna and into that purple, and I'll let that bleed and see what that does. Okay, so I'm going to come in and put the darks underneath here. Wash my brush. I'm pretty dry up here now. So I'm going to leave I'm going to paint with water underneath that wing into his fluffy bit down the bottom there. So just clean water. I'm going to bring that all the way up, sort of halfway on his tummy. And I want this pretty wet. Okay, then I'm going to grab, I think, a little bit of Van Dyke. Let's try, we'll start with some Van Dyke brown. And I'm going to run it underneath that wing. So I'm just starting to give myself a bit of a shadow underneath to sit that wing on top of the tummy. I want a bit of a gap between the wing and the dark that I'm putting in, but I don't want it too huge. So I'll just close that off a little bit. And you've got to remember that this will dry a lot lighter than it looks at the moment. So I'm going to wet my brush, come up and touch to that edge, to that Van Dyke brown. And then I'm going to let it walk all the way over to this side of the tummy. Give myself, well, that was a bit of a clumsy flick there. I'll come back to that. So what I'm after is soft. I want this to be nice and blended. No really hard lines in here at the moment. And I need to watch this edge. I don't want to form an edge on there, so I can either wick that off with my brush or just touch a tissue to that edge just to soften it back. Okay, now it's already starting to disappear, so I need it to go darker than that again. So now I'm going to pick up a bit of Van Dyke and a bit of indigo and come on stronger. My page is still damp, so I can add more pigment without getting into trouble. Wash my brush. I'm just chucking on some more water because I want it to stay nice and soft. Letting that move around. Now I'm not going to put the leg, I'm not going to put the foot in. I'll just put a little flick and see how I feel about that later. Right, now if my pigment starts to run up that way, I want more light in here than I've got there. I can tilt, at the moment I'm painting flat, but I can tilt that up and let it run down the other way. So if I whack some more water on that, I can soften that edge and I can let the pigment travel down in the other direction. And really this is just about trying to round up the subject. Now I will need to strengthen that again, but I'm going to stay out of there and let that dry and come back up and do the eye for a minute. So I need to paint in a dark, so I'll just pick up a mix of my Van Dyke and my indigo. Now I could have just painted all the way through. I'm just going to see if I want to keep a little line of white or not. No, I just filled it in, so I really don't. I've got a fraction of a white line. If you, I left it and I've closed it in. If I want it back, I can use a little bit of white gouache. And now I can close up the dark, strengthen the dark. I'm just very careful not to put my sleeve in the wet there. I'm going to close up my dark under the beak. So I'm coming on with just straight Van Dyke and indigo, closing that gap. And I'll need to bring that, I think that's quite, I might actually come over that little white join because I think the dark's a bit higher than that. So I'm just washing my brush and dragging it over and just deciding what shape I want that beak to be. So I'm washing my brush and blending that in. And I'll soften this join. So I'm just washing my brush and running the clean, damp brush just along that wet edge so that I get a soft transition. And now I need to clean up, I need to close up the gap that I have in here. But I just want to suggest that the bird's cheek is on this side. So I've come on with some milky indigo and I'm just touching to that pigment that I put in. So I get a bit of a soft bleed to suggest the cheek on that side. Close up that gap. Decide where I want it to join the wing. Okay, now I need some warmth in here. So I'm going to clean my brush, pick up some yellow ochre. Onto dry paper, I'm just going to whack a little bit of yellow ochre around there. Clean my brush, pop that in. If it gets too heavy, if you decide you've got too much, I can just take off the excess. Probably need a bit more than that, but I'll let that dry and see how I feel about that. I need yellow ochre in this chest too, so I can do the same thing. Just take a bit of yellow ochre. This page is wet still down here. I'm dry up the top. And I can keep flooding this without getting into strife because I'm happy for these colours just to mix together. Need to come out to the edge of that first wash. And I might put some more warmth down here as well before I start to strengthen the dark underneath and see how that sits. He's still not dark enough. I need to tuck him underneath here. I'm just deciding whether I need another stroke for the wing, but I might leave it. I am going to put a tiny little highlight in the back of the eye. So I'm going to take some white gouache. I'm just going to pop that in straight into my tube. And I'm just going to pop just a little highlight in the back of the eye. And I might put a little stripe of gouache just in the middle of the beak here. So I'm coming onto dry paper, dragging that white gouache through. You've got to be careful with gouache, a little bit goes a long way. So you can't get it off once it's on. So I wash my brush and I'm just going to drag that along the top of that. Okay, I might chisel out a little bit more. So I left a white and then I accidentally closed it in. I'm just going to take a tiny bit of gouache and I'm just at the front of the eye here. I'm just going to drag a little line through just to give me a bit more of an indication where the eye actually is. I think I can probably get back in here. I'm going to strengthen the dark underneath under here to round him under a bit more. So I'm going to take some Van Dyke and some indigo. My paper's not quite dry, but it's dry enough for me to get in there. So I'm going to come hard underneath the wing. And I'm going to let it soften up as it comes up the tummy, let it get paler. I probably do need a reasonable amount on this edge as well. I'm just washing my brush and touching it to that wet edge. I still feel like maybe I need another brush stroke in here. I might regret this, but I'm just going to pop just another stroke underneath there, and maybe I now have to darken. It's not my favourite thing to do. I'd rather get it in the first hit, but I feel like I just needed something else down there. And then I'll let this dark go even darker underneath. So last strengthening of the dark. I haven't added any more water to this. This is just still all the water that's sitting in the paper. But my brush is drier than my page, so I'm not making cauliflowers because I've got less water in my brush than I do in my paper. Washing my brush, touching it to that edge, and just watching that I don't form a really hard line along here. And also I'll need to watch that I haven't washed out all my yellow ochre because I might need to put that back in. I'm going to add just a touch more yellow ochre just in here where because I've been running my brush over that, I've sort of taken out a lot of the colour that I had in there, so I just whack a little bit more in. And I feel like my yellow ochre, I need a little more strength. Although this is white, I feel like I need a little bit more warmth just up in there. So I'm going to take a little bit of yellow ochre. I'm dry up here now. I'm just going to run a little bit more into there. Okay, now you can, if you, sometimes I look at these and think, oh, actually maybe I wanted a little bit more light in the front. So what you can do is wet your brush and lift a bit of paint and just see whether having a bit of light helps at all. Sometimes it does, sometimes I lift it and then fill it back in again. And because I'm using indigo, it leaves a really nice sheen when you lift the paint. So I'm just washing my brush, taking off the excess moisture on a tissue and just running it along where I want to lift the paint. You do have to keep washing the brush, otherwise you just push pigment around and don't actually lift any light in. Okay, so this might be a bit hard to see on the video, but that's just lift a little bit. And now this, I feel, needs to be darker. My black has kind of disappeared here. So I'm going to re-strengthen that. Take really thick indigo and Van Dyke. I'm going to come on and restate my dark. Wash my brush and just soften that back into the wash underneath. So I'm just running my clean damp brush along that edge. I'm going to lift a little bit. I want my wing to come a bit further down. So I'm going to take this is just a hog's hair oil brush. I'm going to wet it and I'm just going to drag it. So I wet it and took the excess moisture off. And I'm just dragging it through that extra stroke that I put down there. I just want to make my wing slightly bigger. So I've got to keep cleaning it. And then to make that match here, I'm just going to drag some. This is just me fixing up mistakes, you know, it's just looking at it thinking, I don't like that. How can I tidy that up? So then I'll be able to come under here. When that dries, I'll be able to come and strengthen the dark underneath there. Now I'm just looking up the top here. I feel like maybe I need a little bit more colour. This is a little bit too boring up here. So I'm going to take some clean water, just drop a bit in here. And I might actually, have I got any Payne's Grey? I'm just going to take a little bit of, that's Payne's Grey, and drop that in. And I might bring it all the way up to the shoulder there. So because I lifted the paint there to get that highlight in, as I've lifted, it's pushed the pigment just to this edge. Now it's really difficult for me to get in there to lift that pigment. I don't mind the dark there, but I feel like I need this to not be a really hard line. So I'm going to cheat. Got to be really careful because I'm going to use some gouache, and like I said, a little bit goes a long way and you can't get it off once it's on. So I've taken a little bit straight out of my tube, going straight onto that dark edge. Probably should put my glasses on while I do that. Washing my brush, getting a little bit of water in there, and it will blend with the paint underneath. And the trick is to try and make it not look like a really heavy white line, but to just back off that dark. And you might have to do it a couple of times, blending that in. But like I say, a little bit goes a long way and you can't get it off. It's not my preference, I'd rather not have to do it, but sometimes you have to fix these sort of things. Okay, so happy with most of that up there. Possibly need some more detail on the beak. I'm going to come back down here and tuck him under a bit more. I'm dry in here now. So now I'm going to go, because I want it to be strong, I'm going to go on to dry paper, bit of indigo, bit of Van Dyke. I'm going to paint underneath that new shape where I put the wings. So I'm just going straight onto dry paper, painting a line kind of underneath the shouldery bit there, down to his bum, and bringing that out. So I want this to be, I want to mean this now, so I need to make this strong, because I'm still going to wash my brush and blend it in, but I don't want it to disappear. I want this dark to stay dark. So I'm going to wash my brush. I'm going to drag that along the wet edge, curve it around, clean my brush. So I'm just thinking about making a curve in here. I've got to come all the way to that first wash, to the edge rather. I'm just going to push that paint around until it's where I want it to sit. I want to watch that hard edge because I don't want it to be really solid. Wash my brush, rough it along that leading edge. I still feel this shape, my shape's a little bit too tidy, but I can't really change that now. I'm just dragging that out a bit more. I think I just need to put a little bit of dark. I need to kind of show where this shoulder goes. So I'm just going onto dry paper, just popping a touch of indigo in there, and then I'll clean my brush and just soften it a bit. There's not enough pigment up there. And I might even drop a bit more dark into that wet paper, just to give it a bit more oomph around here. Okay, and then I just want to come back up to the beak here. I need to bring that dark all the way down to touch the beak there, and then I probably need another stripe. So I've just taken the excess indigo off my brush, drag some paint through. I'm going to wash my brush now and just drag through the water, because there's a little bit too much light on the top of that beak. And when this fully dries, again, I might have to restate my dark underneath the bottom there, but I've been in here a fair bit. To get the general gist of where we've gone with that, it's working up the darks to round the under. Try not to be quite as tight as I was on the shape there. You can certainly paint the leg and foot in if you want to, or both feet even. And I think the only last thing I'm going to do is I lifted the light in there, but there's possibly a little bit too much light in there now. So I'm just going to take a little bit of Van Dyke, and I'm just going to put the dark back in to just break up that really big light that I had in there. I just wash my brush and just dragging it across the top. I'm starting to fiddle now, so I'll let that dry. Have a go at that and see how you go.